this relates to our debate discussion of debate rebrief, rebutting various legal claims made that the what exactly happened about in 2020, because there were a lot of false claims by people like Stephen Richer, the Arizona election official who I think is soon to be tossed from office. He was the weird guy, remember, from Arizona 2022 that we talked about, with the other guy that was coincidentally probably out of a bad simulation named Bill Gates, another crook, another criminal there in Arizona. But is that remember what Trump said during the debate about the reason why he wasn't able to go forward with the election cases was because of standing.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave a great denunciation of standing, a very common sense denunciation that shows his he was able to translate it in practical political terms. How is it the president of the United States, running for president of the United States, doesn't have standing to determine whether or not the election was done correctly for him for that office? He goes, if I don't have standing, who has standing? So it was a brilliant way of articulating, but a bunch of the fake law Twitter types and some of the fake law tuber types and some of the fake press folks tried to spin that was totally false. Oh, no. Every case was on the merits and on a trial, and standing had nothing to do with what happened in 2020. So I thought it was a good opportunity to correct that misapprehension, to do a real fact check from the law on what happened in election 2020.
Well, let's do it one by one. I remember Pennsylvania definitively standing.
Well, really, there are only 3 cases that Trump was a party to, and only 2 election contests that Trump was a party to. So the first one was Pennsylvania, where they ultimately determined he didn't have standing to challenge certain rules that had changed in Pennsylvania. And the only 2 election contests were brought, one in Georgia, one in state court, one in federal court, because in state court, they would not hear it. By rule, they had to hear it within 5 days, and they just refused to calendar it, refused to schedule, in direct violation, flagrant violation of the law. And all the Georgia courts went along with it. Georgia Court of Appeals refused to schedule it. Georgia Supreme Court refused to schedule it. And so then they went to federal district court. And what did the federal district court say? No standing. No standing. Can't require the Georgia courts to actually hear your election contest. So his election contest was never heard. The other one was brought to the Supreme Court of the United States. The main case challenging the election contest outside of Georgia was the case that Trump joined, that hundreds of congressmen joined, that many states' attorneys general joined, that many leading legal scholars joined, and that was the direct original action brought before the Supreme Court of the United States about whether other states had violated the Constitution and how the election had been conducted. And what happened there? Supreme Court said no standing. That was the exact words, no standing. That was the exact words in all 3 cases. So when people like Stephen Richer, when other people go out there and pretend, oh no, it was factually decided, it was decided on the merits, these cases concern Trump as a party, they're just flat out lying. Trump was exactly right. The fact check is Trump was precisely true. And to go back to what was in those election contests, because that's magically being re-challenged again, is what was being challenged in Georgia and what was being challenged for the U.S. Supreme Court were the same. Which was the question of whether only constitutionally qualified voters cast presidential ballots, whether the method by which people voted was a constitutionally qualified method of casting a ballot for the president of the United States, and third, whether the canvassing and counting of those ballots by election officials was a constitutionally qualified mechanism of counting and canvassing the ballots. The legal standard does not require you prove any fraud. The legal standard does not require you prove how those people would have voted otherwise if it had been an honest election. All you have to show is that there were more votes in doubt because constitutionally qualified procedures were not followed than the margin of victory in your particular election. That was the challenge before the Supreme Court of the United States. That was the challenge in the state of Georgia. And for those that have forgot, over 400 sworn documents and declarations from experts and witnesses substantiated that more than 100,000 people voted in Georgia who either were not constitutionally qualified to vote, or the method and mechanism by which they cast their ballots was not a constitutionally qualified mechanism or method, and the canvassing and counting of the ballots was not done in a constitutionally qualified manner. One person, one vote. That's what the Supreme Court is supposed to be our principle. But they've refused to enforce it when it came to 2020's election. They never decided whether or not those allegations were true. And you know the allegations were true because the Democrats and every court involved said they didn't want to deal with the merits. If Democrats were right on the merits, they would have been eager for vindication on the merits. Instead, they were all begging, please, judge, please don't allow this case to go to trial on the merits. None of them reached trial on the merits. And in fact, no adjudication on these merits were ever heard. Any independent evidentiary inquiry will see there were more votes cast that are in doubt for whether they were cast by a constitutionally qualified voter, or the method by which they voted was constitutionally qualified, or the method by which their ballot was counted in canvass was constitutionally qualified, then the margin of victory in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona enough to determine the outcome of 2020 election. So don't listen to any of the fraudsters and the rest out there that are trying to gaslight you into thinking something happened that never happened in 2020.
No, but
it's a full, fair trial on the merits.
The talking points were there were 60 Trump lawsuits, and nobody can even, it gets too complicated. It's the scattershot. There were 60 lawsuits, and Trump lost all of them. He was only plaintiff in 3. Yeah. Who just refresh all of our memories? Who were the plaintiffs in the other cases?
Involved a whole bunch of other people that brought suit. Sidney Powell brought suit. Other people brought suit. There again, by the way, none of Sidney Powell's cases ever reached the merits either. And I mean, almost none of these cases reached the merits. In the few that did, in Arizona, they discovered they had a Democratic expert come in and wanted to see who, if people were wondering, who were the constitutionally unqualified voters in Georgia that they proved with everything, with the numbers and all of it. It was people under the age of 18 at the time they registered. It was people. They found, by the way, thousands of dead people who were said to have voted after they died. So when people say, "Oh, that never happened," no, they documented one by one in Georgia. The people's family, they found that, for example, one of the little tricks and grifts was to register people at post office boxes and then to mass mail those votes in. This is part of what 2,000 Mules was all about. The goal was to get their hands on ballots by any means, and then to cast a ballot in the name of a person they knew wouldn't otherwise be able to disagree with that ballot. Dead people make great versions of that. In other cases, underage people make good versions of that. You register they're not going to vote because they know they're not supposed to. Somebody else registers for them. Somebody else gets the ballot in their name. And one of the ways you detect this is they register in a different county than they actually live. Right? This popped up all over the place. There are people who are registered in other states who are magically registering to vote in Georgia. People who voted in other states who voted in Georgia. And then people like Matt Brainerd would call them up and they would like, I didn't vote in Georgia. A person went public about this that had gone from Arizona to Tennessee. And because his demographics fit the right Democratic demographics, young black male, I assume people in Arizona thought this would never get called out. He did call it out because he was like, I don't live in Arizona. I didn't vote. I moved away from there 9 months ago. And so you register a bunch of homeless people to vote. The homeless people don't vote, but they're not likely to step forward and say, hold on a second, I didn't vote. And most people don't even know they're listed on the voter rolls as voting. So so they don't know to call it out in the first place. It's a massive investigative inquiry. But they went through with a fine-tooth comb documenting one after the other, after the other, after the other. In terms of constitutionally unqualified method of voting, that is mail-in voting, which requires a certain way of requesting the ballot, a certain way of receiving the ballot, a certain way of filling out the ballot, a certain way of filling out the envelope outside of it, in terms of dating and signatures, and then a certain way of returning the ballot, and then that ballot having a signature match check. In all the states, Democrats had systematically sued and done secret deals with corrupted and conflicted government officials to not enforce signature matches. In fact, in Arizona, when the Democratic Party's own expert evaluated, it said too many of the signatures don't match. It was 10 times more than the margin of victory in Arizona. What does the judge suddenly decide? Oh, you have to prove that the reason the signature doesn't match is fraud. That's a direct that contradicts the law, because that's an almost impossible path. You're going to try to find those 350 or 500 or 10,000 witnesses. You're going to go try. I mean, that's an impossible evidentiary burden. That's deliberately why the law is written the way it is, so you don't have to prove that. They changed the standards in order to avoid accountability in the 2020 election. So Trump was absolutely right. He was denied on procedural grounds. The few cases that had any substantive reached any substantive judgment were not Trump's cases. They were other people's cases. And even in those few rare cases, the courts, there's not one jury trial that ever happened on the election fraud issues, ever. So anyone who says that is lying to you. Trump was right. Legal fact check. Trump right. Media wrong. Law 2 wrong. Law Twitter wrong.